Good afternoon, everyone. Hello to those of you, and good morning for those of you who are in a different timeline. My name is Halil Karib. I am the Regional Director of the Strategic Initiative for Women in the Horn of Africa. I am here today to help in facilitating these critical and important sessions about a critical issue that is related to the conditions and situations of women and girls in Sudan, which is the issue of women in forced disappearance. This particular matter, SIHA has been working on it since the beginning of the war in April 15 to 23. We have been navigating a territory that's new to us to a large extent, I would say. Matters of enforced disappearance and working around such a complex issue, it has not been among the issues that we have been involved heavily on as we are navigating the sequence of human rights violations against women in Sudan and across the Horn of Africa. Also, the patterns of enforced disappearance that's related to women in conflict, and particularly enforced disappearance that's affiliated with non-state actors, that's associated with non-state actors, is something that we are learning to work on. We're very grateful for the expertise and the support that we have received from many colleagues, Sudanese and non-Sudanese, but also to the dedications and commitments of my colleagues, at SIHA and our networks across Sudan. Before we start introducing, the agenda of this session, I'd like just to go through a few ground rules. Please note that this webinar or this session can be heard in both languages, English and Arabic. So please go to the sign of the globe on your screen, press the language that you want to hear the webinars on, if you would like to hear it in Arabic or if you would like to hear it in English. That's very, very important. Also, please note that we have a very, busy program. And, if in case, we had to conclude this session and this webinar before we have an open interactions with the participants, we are going to share the emails and the contact informations of all the speakers, their emails in the chat, and we encourage you to share your questions and comments on the chat. My colleagues, who are helping in, supporting this conversation, they will make sure that all information is posted on the chat so that you can follow up with us. And please don't hesitate, even if you felt that you need to ask for further conversations or meeting or communications via email. I hope that we will have the time to talk to some of you. We have a really fantastic group of experts, individuals who have a very in-depth experience on this complex matter. And, I really hope that some of our knowledge that we have accumulated over the past almost 2 years, we will be able to reflect on it in this session with you. It's not quite typical that, women are the center of the issue of enforced disappearance. From what I have been hearing, often women are looked at as the family members, as the individual who struggle with the enforced disappearance of, their male family members and partners and so on. But and in Sudan, there is, of course, a large number of civilians who are subjected to enforced disappearance. But what we observed, that the least talked about and the least discussed is the issue of enforced disappearances of women. Through our work, we have had conversations with families who would claim that their daughters has died than being enforced disappeared or taken and they don't know where are they. And this situation is quite common. There is a lot of shame and a lot of stigma around acknowledging the fact that women are enforced disappeared and subjected to abductions. And it's very, very unfortunate that this issue is happening as we speak. The numbers of women and young girls, children who were taken, in broad daylight is accumulating. But unfortunately, the documentations is extremely poor due to a number of reasons. In addition to the social stigma, the conditions of the war, the lack of communications, the extremely limited resources that's allocated for human rights work and for human rights defenders and activists at the front line is also another challenge. So individuals who were very keen in documenting and extending protections and respond to victims of human rights violations in Sudan, most of the time they had to do this work as volunteers or based on, on very, very limited resources. And that makes the documentations, particularly of women's enforced disappearance, quite a challenge. I would like to invite my colleague, Ma'ab Abdullah. Ma'ab, she is, one of our team who works on communications and research, and she has dedicated significant amount of time into this issue, in verifications of informations, in communicating with the families, and in tracking, cases of enforced disappearance. But most importantly, she was dynamo behind compiling this report that's in your hands at the moment. Ma'ab? Ma'ab is going to share with us a brief presentations on the report that probably was shared with you right now in the chat. So.
شكرا أستاذة هالة، وشكرا لكم جميعا أنه انضميتوا لنا في تدشين
Thank you, Hala, and thank you all for joining us in the launching of this report. And the report is about the invisible and unheard woman and the women in Sudan who suffered from enforced disappearance, focusing on the cases of the missing women between 2023 and this is the work of SIHA focusing on the enforced disappearance. The report started as a campaign on the social media in the middle of 2023. The purpose of this campaign was that we reported a disadvantage or unwillingness of reporting the cases of enforced disappearance. The real cases of this of enforced disappearance didn't match the reality, and then we started to think about collecting the data and mapping the situation of the missing women, and we were able to report 236 cases of women missing, and we believe that this number doesn't reflect the real situation because, of course, the elements of stigma and fear reduce the number of reporting. This data was collected from open sources that, with great reliability and credibility, including the information we received from Mafqud Initiative, which work on the missing people after the disperse of the Al-Qiyada sit-in. We managed to identify some patterns of enforced disappearance for women. Every button start with a new case, which involve the RSF controlling a certain area, and the second button involves the RSF controlling this area and settle in it. The reports about the missing women and men rise after the entrance of the RSF in some region. We noticed this in Khartoum and then in Jazeera and Sinnar. In Khartoum, most of the cases happened between April and May, which was the first stage of the invasion of the RSF of Khartoum. In Khartoum, there are a lot of student campuses for female students who are living independently. In the first days of the war, the RSF was reported to invade the residence of people and the residence of students. In the first days of the war, most of the cases reported included identification of dead body of a woman called Hala in a car. She was shot dead by a bullet in an RSF controlled area. She was kidnapped by the RSF before she was shot. In the same months, in May, there was a report about a woman called Insaf Abdullah. Her dead body was found. Nobody knew her identity, and her family couldn't identify her until they saw her picture on the social media. She was possibly missing for some time. According to the High Commissioner of Human Rights, the reports of the survivors and the witnesses in Riyadh, in Khartoum, there were some reports of enforced detention of women starting from April 2023, and also in May, SIHA Network obtained some reports that some young women were spotted on RSF vehicles. Also, we registered a rising cases of enforced disappearance in the following months. 14 cases were reported in the span of two days. In November 2023. Also, there was an announcement in Sinnar about the missing 2,000 people. Also, in June, there were reports about missing women. All this confirm the danger of the existence of the RSF in any area. Once they gain control of an area, as we have seen in December 2023 when they controlled the Jazeera. The second button is the settlement of RSF in any given region. Once they settle down, they start to rape women and exercise and commit other crimes such as kidnapping and threatening. The rape occurs when women try to flee the conflict area or when they want to move between two locations. For example, SIHA contacted the family of Jihad who disappeared in 2023 when she went out to buy medicine for her kid. She was last seen with her friend in a public transportation vehicle in an area controlled by RSF. The family then tried to reach to the RSF and asked what happened was that the RSF soldier told them not to contact them anymore. After that, there was some military confrontation, and that caused the death of two females. Until this day, they don't know what happened really. Also, two incidents were reported in Western Darfur and also in Khartoum. Two women were kidnapped by the RSF in a space of between 2 days to 8 months. Mass rape was also reported. In South Darfur, a woman was kidnapped from the street and detained and repeatedly raped by the RSF. Also, the victims included women detained in remote areas where they were beaten and sexually abused and physically abused before they were released by the RSF, which threw them on the street. The next button revolves around the reporting of two cases around 10 and 13 years who were kidnapped in front of their woman and their mother. Also, the young women who were kidnapped sometimes are returned to their families, where the perpetrators try to hide the evidence of the crime. Also, in the Halfaya area, there was a report that some young women were beaten and the family members tried to defend them, and they were also beaten. In Sherganil, also some reports about the same incident. SIHA also obtained information about the release of some hostages detained by the RSF. This woman was detained with another 19 women, and these women were subject to sexual crimes. They were found dead, and this girl was detained in a place where dead body of other women were decaying. Also, SIHA obtained reports about violations against women in different places in Khartoum, where women were detained and forced to clean and cook for the soldiers of the RSF. They were detained and under siege and forced to work under threat. And that includes also some reports in Madani in Jazeera. Most of the cases we registered in Khartoum, around 96 cases in Jazeera, 97 cases, which indicated an increase after the invasion of the RSF. Despite all that, all these numbers, we consider them not really representative of the reality, because we have witnesses that indicated that they have been detained with other women in detention centers, and these women are not registered as missing. There is a huge gap between the reported figures and the actual figures. Until today, 209 of the missing women are still missing. 12% of them were found, which explains, which shows that they rarely resurface. Usually, we will not be able to know their destiny. Also, we encounter challenges, including hard access to families. Most of the areas controlled by the RSF experience a problem of internet accessibility. Also, all the posts on social media about missing women are deleted after a short while, because people are under the pressure of social stigma or fear of revenge. Also, there is a problem in accessing information from the rural area and the remote areas of Sudan. Conclusion of in SIHA Network, we call for immediate measures to the protection of women and girls, the missing women and girls, and to pressure for steps to identify their places and to put measures to prevent enforced disappearance. We also call to establish a network from civil society organizations that work to support the documentation, electronic documentation of the missing women and men, and to support their families. Also, to raise the awareness about the people working in enforced disappearance. Also, the committee that the commission of the enforced disappearance and the tools working on it. Also, we call for providing of funds to support the skills. Thank you, Ma'a, for this effort and for this presentation. This violation is stark, and we thank you again for all the information you provided.
I'm going to ask my colleagues to put the film on at this point so that we can move to the rest of the speakers after the film. Are we ready? Excellent. So let's go ahead. A quick note about the film. This film is being done in collaborations with our friends at SIHA Network. So it's really important to mention that, you know, we are quite grateful for them and for the effort they have put in toward the productions of this film with SIHA. Yeah.
يقول لي طرحة يتم الأفوايد ويقول لي طيب شاب فستاني فيها يعني بتعرف تطقم تلبس مطقم تمشي تجيب الحاجة المطقمة تجي تلبسها في ليل تجي عادي جاب الطرحة دي بس تقول لبستين ولا 3 لبسات فقط. بتحب الحياة السمحة. رواية إبراهيم عثمان آدم الدومة. المولود عام 2004 شهر 3 يوم 27. خرجت من المنزل يوم 26/7/2023 والله عندي كده طلعت وما لقيت ما جات.
أنا ربنا إن شاء الله.
ما هي طلعت ما لقيتها.
طلعت من البيت.
هاي
ما مرسلة ولا مالها؟
والله مرسلة بس ثلج، يمكن يجيب ثلج وما جات. وعليكم السلام. أهلا وسهلا عبير.
كيفك إن شاء الله طيبة يا أختي؟
تمام الحمد لله. أخبارك وصحتك؟
الحمد لله ما نشكره. كيفك إن شاء الله طيب؟ كيف مع الصبر؟
كويسين الحمد لله.
الحمد لله. الأولاد كيف؟
كويسين والله نحمد الله.
وهديت مع النزوح وتعبوا؟
والله النزوح دي الله الحمد لله يعني.
اليومين دول أنا شوية كده مقصرة والله منك كده، بس مع مشغوليات الشغل حبيبتي.
لا ما مشكلة عارفين الظرف.
في جديد؟
والله ما في جديد.
سمعت أي حاجة؟
والله يا عبير ما في أي جديد
نهائي؟
والله نهائي.
ولا المنظمات المشاكلات دي ولا ما ادوك اي خبر؟ ما قال لك بنعمل لك اي حاجه؟ ما في اي شيء
والله ما في أي شيء. أنا كنت في بطن أمي 3 شهور وأبوي رجع الغرب بعد ما اتولدت والحمد لله يعني ربوني وقروني المدارس. في المدرسة قاموا سجلوني بسهام إسحاق. في النهاية يعني إن سهام إسحاق فعلا إسحاق أبوي والله ما شاء الله أبو أخواني ربانا وقرانا وإيش، لكن دار أمشي أنا أثبت وجودي إن أنا ترى سماوي أبوي في الغرب. الوالدة قالت لي خلاص أبوك فعلا اسمه حاجر علي، قال لي أبوك في الغرب. أنا بعد عمري بقت 24 سنة والله مشيت أثبتت وجودي. يعني أنا مرات شفت نتخيل إنه أشوف أبوي واقف قدام، مرات بجي برسمه في الحيطة نجي نقيف جنبه نقول له يا أبوي شدة مشوق إنه إني أمل ألقى أبوي. ومرات برسمه في الواطة، برسم زول طويل ولابس إمة ونعال مركوب وكده وعنده عصا، نجي نقيف ننبطح حديد في الواطة نقول يا أبوي. شوف سبحان الله. وفي ده أنا لغاية ما شفتها وكده كان عمري زي 14 و15 و16 لغاية ما لقيت وصلت لقيت ما فقدت الأمل لقيت أبوي والله العظيم. يعني حسي أنا يعني احتفى بالكده ما فقدت الأمل. يعني احتمال ألقاه والله احتمال ألقاه جاي بعباية ولابس طرحة البصلية وشايل شنطته وجاي من المدرسة وكده. يعني احتمال كبير يعني القاسة ما فقدت الأمل. هاي أو في زول اتصل لي بالتليفون يقول لك يا أختي أنا البنت لقيته الحتة الفلاني، يعني أصلا ما فقدت الأمل. هاي الحي بياقي. يعني إذا كان زول مات يقول لك فلان ده خلاص مات الحمد لله، لكن الحي بياقي طب ما فقدت الأمل.
النساء السودانيات العالقات في مناطق الحرب في بقاع ممتدة وعريضة في كل السودان، بيعانى بشكل يومي من ويلات الحريق دي. اختبر أحوال عظيمة، شال مسؤوليات كانت بتتوالد على مدار الدقيقة، وهم محاوطات بالخوف من كل اتجاه وبآلام الفقد بسبب الموت اليومي، وكانوا مضطرات تتحمل الآلام دي يواصلوا في أدوار ومهامنا اليومية.
الفترة الثالث خشينا جوا برضه، فتشنا ليبيا دي مستشفى ليبيا التحسسي، مستشفى السين، يمكن قلنا ماشي يمكن تصادف في طلقة وشنو اللي حصل يعني ما معروف طبعا. الزول الغايب بتاع بتعرف انت تتوقع منه اي حاجة. ما يتلغت. مشينا القسم بتاع 18 مدينة النخيل اللي الصالحة هنا برضه، بلغنا لقينا كان مسيطر الدعم السريع في الحتة دي، برضه مشينا ليهم وبلغنا وريناهم، قال لنا والله ما الشخصية دي ما علينا، لكن احنا كان لقيناهم وما عندنا مشكلة نوروكم ونسلموكم. رجعنا مشينا إسكان 76، مشينا عملنا البلاغ هنا في شهر 10، شهر 11 أنا طلعت عين القطارف. هذه البلاغ اللي عملتها في إسكان 76 شهر 10 25 تخيلي. دي اللي عملتها، دي صورتها، دي طرحت الطلعت بيها ذاتها.
المشكلة إنه هو ما في قانون يخص السيدات، رغم إنه ما يحدث للسيدات خلال الاختفاء القسري بيفوق الرجال، لأنه الاختفاء القسري اللي بيقع على النساء، حالة الاختفاء القسري هي حالة يعني واحدة من عناصر الحاجة اللي في الاختفاء القسري، إنه أنت محروم من الحماية القانونية. محروم من الحماية القانونية، أنت معرض لجميع أنواع الانتهاكات، تعذيب، قتل، كله من ده. المرأة هي عندها خطر إضافي في الاختفاء القسري، إنها هي يقع عليها العنف الجنسي.
وفقا للتقارير اللي اشتغلنا عليها لغاية نوفمبر 2024 تم توثيق 231 حالة لنساء وفتيات مفقودات، حوالي 88% منهم ما زال مفقودات، ما في معلومات متوفرة عنهم. تم العثور على 12% فقط من الحالات اللي احنا اشتغلنا عليها. الحالات دي عدد كبير جدا منها هو كان في ولاية الخرطوم، بعدها ولاية الجزيرة، لكن ولاية الجزيرة حصل فيها تغيير كبير في العدد ده، تحديدا بعد الحملة الانتقامية اللي حصلت في شرق الجزيرة من الله الدعم السريع، وده خلى انه احنا بس في الفترة دي نوثق لفقدان 45 من النساء والفتيات.
لكن الإجراءات المفترض تتبع في حالة اختفاء السيدات على المستوى المحلي هو الإبلاغ عن المختفية في لدى النيابات الموجودة في المناطق الآمنة. يعني هسه ممكن انت يعني تفتح بلاغ في كل المدن اللي فيها نيابات شغالة، يعني فيها نيابات شغالة ممكن تفتح بلاغ. ده الإجراء الأول ممكن انت تعمله على المستوى المحلي. على المستوى الدولي انت في حاجة اسمها الإجراء العاجل. الإجراء العاجل ده مقدم للجنة الخاصة بالاختفاء القسري في مجلس حقوق الإنسان، وزي ما قلنا انه هي اللجنه دي بتخاطب الحكومه وبتطلعك انت مقدم الطلب على كل الردود اللي بتجيها من الحكومه، وانت اسمك او بتكون انت اسم مخفي، الحكومه ما بتعرف انه من الذي قدم الطلب العاجل. ديل الاثنين الحاجات العاجله جدا المفترض انه تتبع في حاله اي اختفاء سيده.
الاثر الاجتماعي ده هو مرتبط بشكل اساسي بمجتمعاتنا وتركيبتها. وصمة العار المرتبطة، لأنها يعني وصمة العار تحديدا في الاختفاء القسري مرتبطة بالعنف الجنسي، ده بتخلي إنه الأسر تعيش في عزلة اجتماعية. يعني في حتى بعض الأسر غيرت مكان سكنها عشان هي ما تكون مضطرة إنها هي تجاوب على السؤال بتاع إنه بتكون وين، حصل عليها شنو. فالأثر الاجتماعي بيكون للاختفاء القسري هو أثر عميق. واحدة من الحاجات الأساسية اللي كانت بتواجهنا إنه يعني صعوبة الوصول للأسر نفسها، لأنه كثير من الأسر بتتردد في إنها تشارك المعلومات، والتردد ده عنده أسباب كثيرة، أهمها إنه هو خوف من الانتقام، لأن الأسر بتفتكر إنه يعني إذا تشاركت المعلومات حول البنات المفقودات أعلنوا عنهم وبدوا بالبحث عنهم، إنه ده قد يعرضهم لإنه يعني المختطفين أو المعتدين إنه هم ينتقموا إذا كان من الأسرة مباشرة أو ينتقموا من البنات المختطفات. الكلام ده بيحصل عادة في المناطق الخاضعة لستر الدعم السريع.
لانه ما في سلطه اصلا مدربه للناس تتعامل مع القضايا دي ولا حتى النيابه. لذلك بتكتفي الشرطه بانها هي بتصدر النشره الجنائيه وبتكفل الموضوع على كده. فده كله بتعمل، لكن احنا قدرنا بالضغط على النيابه انه نفعل الماده 186 الفقره نون اللي هي بتتكلم عن اغتصاب غصري، وقدرنا انه النيابه تفتح لنا بلاغ في يوم 27/7/2023 في مدني. يمكن يكون ده اول بلاغ يفتح تحت الماده 186 بعد دخول قوات الدعم السريع لمدني. تحولنا لكسلة والقضارف، فما كان بيفتحوا الماده 186 الفقره نون، كانوا بيفتحوا لنا اختطاف اللي هي الماده 60 واحتغال غير مشروع. ده اللي قاعد يتم من اجراءات. لكن حتى لو بعد انه المفتاح لك 186 ولا اختطاف، ما قاعد الشرطه للنيابه قاعد تقوم باي دور بتاع تحري او تغصي عشان يقدروا يصلوا للجنان.
نتمنى انه ان شاء الله شهر 5 قبل شهر 5 ان شاء الله ربنا يزحيرها بالسلامه وتمتهن شهاده سودانيه. كانت احلامها ان تنتهي شهاده سودانيه، كانت علميه ان تنتهي شهاده سودانيه ترتقي في كليه الطيران. يعني دي كان هوايتها من شافعة صغير، من كانت في الروضه يعني تقول لي امي انا بجري في كليه الطيران، انا ابقى لي مضيفه امشي من بلد لبلد، ان انا سودانيه اني امشي من بلد لبلد.
أسر المفقودين يعني ممكن الحاجة اللي هتعملها وتكون بالنسبة لها دي حاجة مفيدة، إن هم يعني يتعاونوا مع المجتمعات المحلية ويعتمدوا بشكل أساسي على الدعم المجتمعي، ويتواصلوا مع المبادرات المحلية ومع المنظمات المحلية الموجودة. برضو يعني المسألة بتاعت الاستمرار في إنه يعني يتم الإبلاغ، وده هيخلي إنه يعني يشجع عندهم القصة بتاعت عدم فقدان الأمل والإبلاغ عن الحالات بناتهم المفقودات، في إنه يتيح لهم كل الفرص الموجودة في إنه هم يقدروا يصلوا لأي معلومات عنهم. في الآخر المسألة بتاعت التمسك بالأمل، ودي لأنه في بنات وفي نساء اتلقوا، فالتذكير دائما بانه يا اخي في حالات لقت، وانه يعني عوده المفقودات هي حاجه والمفقودين هي حاجه ممكنه. دي حاجه حتخلي الاسر يكون يعني عندهم بصيص امل، او نقدر نقول عندهم امل كبير جدا في انه هم يعني يجتمعوا من جديد ببناتهم وبامهاتهم وبحبايبهم اللي فقدوهم.
Thank you very much for listening to Rukai's mother's voice as she was sharing with us her painful journey and her hope that at some point she's going to find Rukaya. Rukai's mother, by the way, she calls us regularly. So every time there is news about women and girls that were released from a certain detention center, or they were found somewhere, or even informations about bodies of women and girls that were found somewhere amidst this brutal war, she sent a message and she just asked, do you have any information about those girls or those women? It's quite, we feel quite helpless, but we're also trying our best, to encourage her, at least to keep talking, about Ruqayya, and to keep and letting her know that there is also other families, and we're hoping that at some point, if there is relatively some sort of stability, we can help her to connect to other families of women and girls who were also enforced disappeared. Our next speaker is Julie Pardesh. Julie is a senior legal advisor at Redress. She worked at Redress since 2018. She leads Redress, which is a UK-based human rights organizations accountability work. And prior to Redress, she worked for 5 years to investigate international crimes in Cambodia. Between 2011 and 2013, Julie practiced criminal and refugee law in Paris, France. Julie has always been a very solid and strong supporter of SIHA and of our work. And Redress also has been one of the organizations who contributed quite significantly to the human rights work in Sudan. Julie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Hala, and thank you very much for organizing today's event and inviting me as well as the other panelists. I find it very, very hard, I have to say, to come as the first speaker after the video that we just watched and the harrowing accounts that we've just heard. So again, thank you very much for bringing this topic up again, because it's so important at the moment as the violations are ongoing. And I really salute the survivors' resilience in speaking up and quite publicly and openly about the sorrows and the horrors that are striking them at the moment. Like you said, I work at Redress, which is an international organization that has really far-reaching knowledge on Sudan. While I've been there for the last 6 years now, Redress itself has over 20 years of experience working on the violations of Sudan, and enforced disappearance, sadly, is really not a new topic to the Sudanese context. All of that said, I'm going to explore today a little bit about the significance of enforced disappearance as a crime, the international legal framework that governs it, and the challenges that we have faced. And I think a few of those were already touched upon by Saab, Hala, but also by that short movie that we just watched in seeking justice and accountability as well as reparation for this crime. So let me just start with some very basic things. Enforced disappearance is defined in international law, and specifically in the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance, as the arrest, detention, abduction, or any other form of deprivation of liberty by agents of the state, or by persons or groups of persons acting with the authorization, the support, or acquiescence of the state. And that arrest, detention, or abduction is being followed by an absence of information or a refusal to acknowledge the deprivation of liberty, or by concealment of the fate or whereabouts of the disappeared person. And that places the disappeared person outside of the protection of the law. This crime, as we have just seen, strips the victims of their fundamental human rights and inflicts very, very profound psychological and emotional harm on the families and the loved ones who are left in limbo and who are unaware of whether their family members is even alive or dead. It's been used as a tool of oppression all over the world in contexts of internal armed conflict, but also to oppress the population, to silence opposition and dissent, and to discriminate against minorities, among many other circumstances. On the African continent specifically, its use can be traced back to colonial times, so it really dates very far back, and it was used by colonial powers against freedom fighters in order to silence them. In Sudan, its use goes far back as well, and enforced disappearance is being used in the current armed conflict, as this report and movie highlighted. But it was also used by the Bashir regime to suppress dissent and by militia groups in Darfur. There are many gendered and transsectional aspects to enforced disappearance. So first, women and girls, when they are being subjected to enforced disappearance, as we've heard, are very particularly vulnerable to sexual and gender-based violence, but also to trafficking, to slavery, and to other gendered crimes. So it's quite important to not look at enforced disappearance in a vacuum, but to see it as part of a wider pattern of crimes. And the women left behind by a person who's been disappeared and related to disappeared males are very often left without revenue and also become more vulnerable to gender-based crimes, in particular in a traditionally patriarchal society and one in which there is an ongoing armed conflict. Very often, they're also blamed for the disappearance of a husband or a male relative and ostracized. Enforced disappearance in Sudan often has a discriminatory dimension in addition and is carried out as part of ethnic cleansing. So very often it's not just a gender dimension, there's not just gender dimension, but also ethnic ones. The international community has developed several frameworks to enforce disappearance. There's a declaration on enforced disappearance that was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1992. But the most notable instrument is the International Convention on the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance, which was adopted by the General Assembly in 2006 and came into force in 2011. And Sudan became a party to the convention during its transition in 2021. Sadly, it didn't have the time to properly domesticate the convention, so that it's a very hard crime to trigger investigations for and prosecutions. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights also has guidelines on enforced disappearance in Africa, and I believe that Commissioner Maya will perhaps touch upon those later, as she's the person who wrote it. It's a very strong instrument which lays out in detail the obligations of African states in relation to this crime. And is very comprehensive and up-to-date and aligns with the highest standards on enforced disappearance. So it's really a reference point in relation to litigation or advocacy over this matter. The convention obliges states to take effective measures to prevent enforced disappearance, to criminalize it in domestic law, to investigate it when it happens, to search for the disappeared, to identify and return the remains of the deceased to their family, to prosecute and punish perpetrators, and to provide reparation to the victims. So states must ensure that the victims and their families receive appropriate remedies, including truth, reparation, and support. And it's really essential because of the complete absence of justice for victims and their families that enforced disappearance often leads to, and the very, very far reaching harm that it causes to them. I'll highlight quickly a few elements that I think are important when you look at enforced disappearance. The first one is that it's a continuous violation. So it starts from the moment that the person disappears, but it continues until they have their remains have been identified or the person has been returned to their family. The state involvement is usually a really important element of this crime. That being said, non-state actors have in many contexts used acts which are analogous or similar to enforced disappearance. And there are discussions currently within and between treaty bodies on the appropriate legal principles to be applied to these acts and such perpetrators. That being said, enforced disappearance can be committed by de facto authorities like rebel and insurgents groups, which exercise prerogatives comparable to those normally exercised by legitimate governments. And I think because Sudan is an armed conflict where some areas are held by RSF and others by SAF, it's really important to bear that in mind, that if they exercise effective control, state-like control of over a territory, they are responsible for a human rights violation, and that and for enforced disappearance as a human rights violation. Victims, another point is that victims include relatives and dependents of the disappeared person. There's also no minimum time limit for an enforced disappearance to arise as long as the deprivation of liberty was not acknowledged. So that's really which is the essential element. And even if a person is disappeared for just one day or even a few hours, if you have that absence of acknowledgement, then there is a human rights violation of enforced disappearance, which is constituted. Enforced disappearance is also recognized in the Rome Statute, which is the constitutive element, treaty of the International Criminal Court. It can amount to a crime against humanity if it's carried out as part of a widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population. Though the Rome Statute's definition is a little bit more restrictive than the human rights one, because it does hold that the time limit has to be a little bit longer. We at Redress put together two different reports, which I think the colleagues from SIHA will link in the chat, in which we do find that the Sudan authorities have committed enforced disappearance as a crime against humanity in the context of this conflict, because it is perpetrated as part of a widespread and systematic against the civilian population, but also as a human rights violation. Enforced disappearance causes other violation of one's fundamental rights. That's the right to recognition before the law, to liberty and to security, to not be subjected to torture or ill treatment. Often it's linked to the right to life, because very often, I think it was highlighted during the movie as well, it's tied with summary executions or killings. The right to access justice, the right to truth, the right to reparation, the right to social, economic, and cultural rights, especially for the families. It has been recognized as having attained the status of what is called jus cogens, which means that it's theoretically a non-derogable prohibition that states should respect in any circumstances, including armed conflict. So this prohibition applies at all time, in all circumstances, even in times of war. It's a non-derogable rule. There are some avenues for victims of enforced disappearance beyond the domestic criminal and civil claims, which I understand in Sudan at the moment are impossible to pursue before human rights treaty bodies at regional level and then at international level. I recall that the movie also touched upon some of those. The African Commission has a working group on death penalty, extrajudicial, summary, and arbitrary killings and enforced disappearance in Africa. The Commission itself can receive complaints from individuals against states. And while Sudan is not a party, while Sudan is a party to the Convention Against Torture, the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the Convention on Enforced Disappearance, it has not yet accepted individual complaints mechanisms. But still, urgent appeals, as was raised, can be brought before the Committee on Enforced Disappearance by individuals against the Sudanese state. So despite not hearing individual complaints per se can still hear urgent appeals, urgent complaints by individuals. The United Nations also has a working group on enforced and involuntary disappearance, and letters of allegations and urgent appeals can also be filed against the Sudanese states before these bodies. These are less quasi-jurisdictional and a little bit more diplomatic, and usually they interact with the state organs, which has been a little bit difficult in the past couple of years, but we're going to try and activate again because we think that there are opportunities potentially opening up to push the Sudanese state to respond to this and to trigger investigations. My organizations have done this in the past. In the case of Amir Osman, for instance, a journalist who was temporarily disappeared in 2023, she was quite quickly released after that because there was a lot of diplomatic pressure being imposed by various sources, including this appeal. We have also filed letters of allegations in relation to disappearances in 2019 around the protests. But sadly, these have not yielded results yet. So it can sometimes have instant effects, sometimes effect in the longer run, and sometimes no effect at all, sadly. But if you don't try, you don't know. Of course, there's also at the moment in the broad landscape of accountability in Sudan, the fact-finding missions, which do receive filings from NGOs, and it's good to raise patterns of enforced disappearance so that this crime is documented and can feed into future accountability processes, even though these are, again, quite uncertain and will come further down the line, we hope. The challenges to justice are many in enforced disappearance, and quite a few have already been mentioned by Hala and Mab earlier and by the movie, including the resources issues around documentation, the stigma and fear of the victims coming forward. The resource issue, it has to be said at the moment, is really being exacerbated by the USAID cuts, which affect so many of us. And of course, a recommendation to state actors is to other state actors is to chime in order to fill that gap, because it's really important that documentation shouldn't stop. This crime is underreported. Many states refuse to acknowledge the occurrence of enforced disappearance and do not keep official records of the crime and the victims. They are reluctant to investigate when it takes place. Many victims decide to not report the disappearance because they're afraid of reprisals. They're concerned by the lack of independence of authorities and the lack of due process in a country. And the state's acknowledge or lack of acknowledgement element to it doesn't help victims to report, obviously. Many do now know of the legal remedies available at the national, regional, and international level. So sorry, many victims do not know about that. And in Sudan, the collapse of institutions makes it, of course, almost impossible for victims to seek truth and justice. Women face additional challenges because of the lack of access to public services compared to men. They're very often forced to interact with men in order to obtain documentation, which can also be a taboo or a very difficult thing to do. There's a lack of proper legislation, of course, in Sudan to criminalize enforced disappearance. This leaves victims without an avenue to seek justice and reparation. And another challenge is the lack of effective investigation mechanisms. Often disappearance is followed by that deliberate effort to destroy or conceal.
Sorry to interrupt, but we just have to, if you don't mind, if you can conclude.
Of course.
So sorry.
No problem at all. I totally understand. So the psychological impact is another barrier which is often overlooked. It is essential to continue raising awareness around this issue. And of course, this event is an occasion to do that. it should be everything we should be accompanying with effort to change the laws when it's appropriate to do so, and we should all mobilize actors and make sure that everyone comes together to appropriately respond to this problem and make sure it doesn't happen again. Thank you very much, Hala.
Thank you so much, Julie, and for such a comprehensive presentation. It's very enlightened and extremely, we have learned a lot. And please look at the chat for redress resources, and Julie's email as well is available at the chat. I'm going to move to our next speaker, Dr. Claire Cajon. She's the project manager at the Conventions Against Enforced Disappearances Initiative, CEDI. She also co-organized the first World Conference on Enforced Disappearance held in Geneva in January 2025. I was quite honored to be invited to that conference. It was an amazing event. I have learned a lot from being there. Claire also, she was a legal advisor with the International Commissions of Jurists, and she also worked with the UNHCR and with the Commission for Human Rights in Geneva, and she has a very, very rich expertise on the subject matter. Claire?
Thank you so much, Hala, and the whole team for the opportunity. It's an honor to be with you all this afternoon, and congratulations to you, to SIHA Network, to the whole team for your wonderful, much needed work on this very important yet overlooked issue. So I will cover briefly 3 points today. First, the significance of Sudan ratifying the convention. Second, give a brief overview of the UN human rights bodies, but that will be very brief because Julie has already touched upon that. And finally, a few words on the very first World Congress on Enforced Disappearances. So first, the significance of Sudan ratifying the convention. As Julie mentioned just a while ago, so Sudan ratified the convention in 2021. The transitional government ratified the Convention Against Torture at the same time, after years of advocacy efforts by Sudanese activists and international partners, which shows the importance of advocacy efforts. And so why was that important? Apart from demonstrating the commitment to the global fight against enforced disappearances, the convention provides the tools to prevent and punish enforced disappearances and guarantee victims' rights. But importantly, it provides victims with access to the urgent action procedure, which was mentioned in the film and by Julie, which I will go back to in a minute. But as Julie said, the said convention and its monitoring body, the Committee on Enforced Disappearances, are part of the broader United Nations human rights system, which leads me to my second point. And just to give a brief overview, the human rights within the UN human rights system, there are two kinds of bodies that are composed of experts: the special procedures on the one hand and the treaty bodies on the other hand. In terms of special procedures, the most relevant for us today are the Working Group on Enforced or Involuntary Disappearances, which was the very first mandate established by the Commission back in 1980. And in terms of country-specific mandate, there's also a mandate on Sudan that was created in 1993. The current expert visited the country last year in July, and his findings contributed to the report established by the High Commissioner for Human Rights of the United Nations, which we presented to the Human Rights Council today. And in this report, he does mention widespread disappearances. In terms of treaty bodies, again, so there's a specialized committee, the Committee on Enforced Disappearances, which was established under the convention. But the Human Rights Committee and the Committee Against Torture also address the issue of enforced disappearances. So if we just stop for a minute on the Committee Against Enforced Disappearances, it carries out various functions, but I'd like to draw your attention to the Urgent Actions Procedure, which aims to locate and protect disappeared persons that was mentioned in the film. So how does it work? So when a case is sent to the committee to report a disappearance, the committee then requests the state to take all necessary measures as a matter of urgency to locate and protect the disappeared person. Just to give you an idea, so far the committee has received over 2,000 urgent actions. Over 500 persons have been located thanks to this procedure, and more than 400 alive. As of last September, it was 480 persons who had been found alive. Hopefully, it's more by now. But the thing is, from Sudan since 2021, when the state ratified the convention, the committee has only received 17 urgent actions requests, and one person was found alive. So I'd like to highlight two important points regarding this procedure. The first one is that when the RSF are involved, the link with the state was made so that the cases fall within the scope of the convention. And it's important to underline this link when submitting a request to the committee. And the second point is that regardless of the circumstances, it's important to register those cases to give visibility to the issue and to reflect the gravity of the situation. It's harder for the state to ignore hundreds of cases rather than a few. And I'll just mention briefly that besides this urgent action procedures, the Committee on Enforced Disappearances is currently working on a general comment on the impact of enforced disappearances on women and girls. And this document will address the issue of women and girls subjected to enforced disappearances themselves. And no doubt SIHA Network's report will be of great value to enlighten their work on this issue. But also as the impact of enforced disappearances on women and girls as family members of disappeared persons. And finally, my third point regarding the very first World Congress on Enforced Disappearances. To me, the main achievements was that it brought so many actors from so many countries together. Over 118 countries were represented. Most participants were civil society organizations and victims association representatives, many survivors as well, who were really put at the center of the project. It gave visibility to the issue, and it was an honor to have Hala with us, who could present. Her presentation was on this very issue of the enforced disappearances of women and girls in Sudan's conflict. And many participants told us that they had no idea about what was going on. So it was important to give visibility to this and to put it back on the multilateral agenda. Another concrete result was that commitments were made by actors in the form of voluntary pledges. And it's worth noting that Sudan was one of 16 pledging states. I don't really have time to get into the details of the pledges, but if you'd like to have a look, they all on our website. They publicly available, but just to give you an idea, so Sudan pledged to cooperate with families, to facilitate access to justice, to raise awareness and enhance capacity building of legal professionals, etc. So that's something you can go back to and use because it was publicly announced at the Congress. And finally and importantly, the Congress also led to concrete recommendations and action points, which represented the outcome of a pre-Congress regional consultation in which SIHA Network also took part, and we are grateful for that. So just to mention the three most relevant ones for us today. The first is the creation of a victim-led regional network against enforced disappearances in sub-Saharan Africa, because there is no regional federation like in other regions of the world. The second is the creation of a global youth network against enforced disappearance. And the third is the organization of regular meetings, encounters of women victims of enforced disappearances, so they can learn from each other, amplify their voices, etc. So the report on the Congress will be available next month in English and soon afterwards in Arabic. The challenge now is to keep up the momentum. And I'd just like to conclude by saying that we definitely count on you for the next phase as well. It's important for your work to be known, for those voices to be heard, and we hope to keep facilitating that. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Again, I'll stop here, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate this, this comprehensive feedback and the information about the Congress and all what you have shared about, how we can actually take this further. We're looking forward to continue collaborations with yourself and with the Congress, and to continue to learn from you and be part of the work that you are doing. Not only us, but we are hoping to connect you to other human rights networks that's active in Sudan on the issue of enforced disappearance. And I'm going to move to Ustaz Osman Al-Basri. Osman, he is a human rights defender. He is one of those people who are actually, doing the hard work and the most difficult and complex work by being on the ground, by trying to negotiate as much as possible with local authorities on behalf of families of those who were enforced disappeared. He has been among the very few who has been providing legal advice to the family and connecting, human rights organizations to the families of enforced disappeared. He is also has been the first lawyer, a legal expert who actually paid attention to the importance of filing, reports on cases of enforced disappearance, and has been extremely gender sensitive and aware of the risks that women enforced disappeared are experiencing. Osman, اتفضل.
السلام عليكم وشكرا
Assalamu
لصيحة
alaikum. Thank you for SIHA for organizing this session, which comes in a crucial time.
اصلا هي بدت هسه في السودان. احنا بدينا انه هي الفتيات او النساء عموما
Sudan, women and girls are taking the burden of the struggle to reach the truth in the march of finding their beloved ones. The mother of Ruqayya, as you have seen it, as you have watched in the movie, and as you listen to the other speakers who covered many aspects, I would like to address the legal and economical impacts. In Sudan, this is the first time for the country to pay attention of the enforced disappearance, and that happened after the violent disperse of the sit-in. 90% of the people who established the Congress of the families of the missing, the two representatives selected by that group were both of them were women, and women are really invested in the truth seeking. The enforced disappearance in the past used to be exercised against men, especially against the opposition. But recently, women recently have been the main victim of the enforced disappearance. There is enforced disappearance of girls, for slavery and forced work in detention places, which was also target of air bombardment. They were serving their the people who detained them. They were washing clothes and cooking for them. These were all information we obtained from direct interviews we conducted. Also, we came to know that the young girls were transferred from Khartoum to Western Sudan and used in prostitution. There is a report released by SIHA highlighting this crime. There were 15 girls detained in Kafuri area, ages between 20 and 27 years old. These 15 girls remained in that detention center for 2 months. After that, there were military confrontations and they were released and they survived that detention. All this confirmed that there is the enforced displacement is no longer about men. It also threatens women. Also, we received reports about enforced marriages. RSF soldiers can just pick any woman and force them into marriages. All these are challenges and crimes against women. The second thing that even the missing men, the final burden is shouldered by the women who have to take care of the children and the household, and also they take the responsibility of seeking the truth and find the location of their partners. The crime developed in Sudan is specifically for women. We also documented an incident of a woman who was detained along with her 3-year-old girl. They were detained for 3 months. In her testimony, she said that the detention center was in Riyadh, in Khartoum, and that detention center was a former premises for the Arab League in the Riyadh street, and that detention contained a big number of women detainees, and in that place violence was exercised in different forms: sexual, torture. We move into the fact that in Sudan there are some legislations that talks about the enforced disappearance. Until today, we only have one case out of more than 451 reports. Only one report was written under the Article 86. Really, people don't know if the victims are dead or alive, which would lead you to the fact that the women who are missing or the missing men, if they have any property or have any funds in the banks, their wives cannot access that money, because according to the law, they have to wait for 2 years to confirm the death of the husband.
برضه هي ما بتقدر انها
So
تتصرف
the woman cannot access the
في
funds
الحسابات الماليه بتاع زوجها
in
الموجوده
in the money or in the properties
وبعد ذاك هو بعد ذاك
until
بيقدر
the
الكراع
court
يوزع.
decides that
طوال
after
هذه
2 years
الفتره هي
that the husband is dead, declared dead.
الصرف
During this long period of time,
والرعايه
she
للاطفال ديل،
have to shoulder
وبالتالي بتدنى
the
مستواها
expenses of the
الاقتصادي.
household,
ده
which affect the economic
واحد من
situation of
القوانين.
the
الحاجه الثانيه من
family.
القوانين
This
في
law
قانون
is
الاحوال
problematic
الشخصيه
also in the personal
بيدي الولايه
act.
للاب.
The jurisdiction is
كمان في
given to the
لوائح بتاعت
father,
وزاره
but
الداخليه
there is
عند
also
استخراج الرغبه المؤقته
regulation released by
بيتطلب وجود
the Ministry of
الاب او
Interior
موافقته
that requires the presence of the
للتقرير
father or his consent
بتوكيل
to
لشخص اخر
or
وده
to
ما
give
بيتوفر في الزول المقتصر.
authorization to another
فانت يا
adult
تنتظر
to
انك تعلن الموت
to handle certain responsibilities. So people resort to their relatives.
لطفلك اللي
If you need to
الزوجة هي ما
issue
بتقدر
a document
تقدم
for your
الإعاقة
children,
في المسألة دي من ناحية اللوائح
you cannot do that
بتاعت وزارة
without
الداخلية.
the
وكذلك
presence
السفر
of
برضه السفر
the
ما
missing
بتقدر
father. Also, the
فيه
travel,
بيسمح للزوجة بأنها تستحق
despite all the
كان في
reforms
2020
that
في
allow
القانون
the wife to
لكن
travel
بنلقى
with their
اللوائح
children,
برضه
we also
بتاعت
find that the regulations
وزارة الداخلية
of
والمتطلبات
the
واللي هي
Ministry
مستندة
of
على قانون
Interior
الأحوال الشخصية
Affairs
هي برضه
based on the
بتحيل
personal
المسألة دي إلا بموافقة الزوج.
act.
يعني لحد هسي لحد
They also
أي
limit
قانون هو
the
أنت
access
الزوجة ما
of
بتقدر
women
تسافر بأولادها
to
ما لم
travel
يكن في
with
موافقة
their children
دي
without
نتيجة
the consent of
ممكن
the father.
كامل خلاص.
Can you please conclude?
فدي كلها لوائح
These
ومعيقات للمسألة
are
بتاعت
all regulations and hindering
الوقاية على السيدات.
rules
المهم
against
جدا أنا بس
women.
في النهاية
It is very
داير أقول
important
إنه يا أخي
to state
نحن
that
محتاجين للضغط بصورة
we
كبيرة
need
جدا
to
لأنه
pressure
لازم يكون عندنا قانون بتاع اختفاء
to
قسري وإنه المواد اللي بتأثر
to
في القوانين
create a
الثانية إن كان في اللوائح
legislative
الداخلية إن كان
framework
في قوانين الأحوال
for
الشخصية إنه تلغى القوانين دي
enforce
ويعني
disappearance
تسن التشريعات
and to cancel
تتواكب مع
all these
الجريمة دي.
legislations and to create
وشكرا
new
جزيلا.
ones that are more sensitive to the
في أي سؤال أو
situation. If you have any
داير
question,
إيميل موجود
I am
عندكم
open.
أنا موجود. شكرا جزيلا
Please
صيحة.
write to me via my email. Thank you, Saiha.
Thank you very much, Ustaz Osman, for
Thank you.
highlighting this critical and important point. You know, how women are falling between. Oh, sorry. Let me switch here. Yeah, shukran, Ustaz Osman, you know, for explaining how women are falling between the cracks, between, you know, the personal status law and the you know, the very weak enforced disappearance legislations and the issues of guardianship. So women are not only victims of enforced disappearance, but, you know, they can be re-victimized if they are, you know, the wives or the daughters of those who were enforced disappeared due to guardianship laws and due to laws that obstructs women movements and women access to resources. Now, I'd like to call on Honorable Commissioner Hatim from the African Commissions for Human and People Rights for a quick feedback on this session. He is not around. Is he around? He is not around. Oh my God, yeah, I'm so sorry. Okay, so I was wondering if Honorable Commissioner Maya, former Commissioner on Enforced Disappearance, is available. Commissioner Maya, we would really be honored if we heard from you.
مساء الخير.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
سهلة. مساء الخير.
أهلا وسهلا، مرحبا بك سعادة المفوضة.
Hello, Commissioner. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for all the participants in this webinar. I would like to say today there isn't any task before the African Commission. I don't have any ask in the Commission. I was a former commissioner for 12 years, but now it has ended. I thank you for the invitation and thank you for the importance for the topic. I'll talk for 5 minutes. This report is important because the enforced disappearance in Africa is an ancient one, but the phenomenon has continued up until now, which leads to tragic humanitarian cases. In the beginning, I noticed in the report that this report is the first report that considered one category, women. In Africa, there are so many studies about enforced disappearance, but what we observe about this report, it's a woman enforced disappearance in continuous conflict, and it has become an important issue. As for the guidelines that are adopted in the African Commission, we started from this, working in this phenomena, not only in the armed conflicts, but this phenomenon also is existing in the peaceful times, because this can consider so many people. Mostly, we have observed in African Commission that it is an African phenomenon exercised upon individuals. When we looked at this in the African Commission, we were working as a working group that works on the right to life and enforced disappearance and unlawful killing. We were 3 commissioners with some experts. When I studied enforced disappearance in Africa, I was a member in this working group because the commissioner who was supposed to take the first sessions on this study had died. I took the second role and I studied with the experts the enforced disappearance. We addressed some questions. Should we start by setting a convention to add to the charter of the African Commission related to enforced disappearance? In Africa, can we add an additional protocol on this regard? We know that this issue was important in Africa. The other point of the questions, we addressed the question that should we consider this phenomenon and prepare guidelines that could be part of soft law? Could we consider this phenomenon so it becomes a convention and start by guidelines? I worked with them for 2 years on this issue with some experts. Redress also worked with us. I'd like to thank Julia, who is here with us. We studied the African context of the enforced disappearance. And when we looked at the guidelines, we can see that the African context of this crime is very painful. This observation came from the practices of the African Commission. When we observed that the committee received so many complaints on about enforced disappearances in African countries. When we started working on these guidelining principles, we were taking into consideration this issue. First, we studied the categories vulnerable to enforced disappearances. The human rights advocates and the journalists. And in the study, we observed that there is another vulnerable group, women and girls. There is a special section about women and girls, and another section for immigrants in the guidelining principles. And we studied also the fundamental principles and the elements that underpin these phenomena. There is also a section about the responsibility of states and the prosecution. As for the report of SIHA, I observed that this report for the first time considered the reality in Sudan of the phenomenon. We also, I was also wondering when the report was presented, how those who worked for the report collected the data, given the current situation in Sudan of the ongoing war. How they collected all this data about enforced disappearance. That's a great effort. As for this report, I have some recommendations. Since the commission is not here, and he's the one responsible for the human rights violation in Sudan. This report should be presented to the Commissioner Hatim, and he should be responsible for this report, and he should reach out to SIHA Network to arrange in the coming time, in the coming meeting in May, in this meeting of the African Commission in this year, if he can arrange any activity in the African Commission with some associations. It's a very important activity. There can be African countries there, and this report can be credible and presented before all the associations and the countries, so that they know women enforced disappearance is very significant and a humanitarian issue. Hala, if you can reach out to the Commissioner Hatim so that he considers this report, so we have additional information in the African Commission about the women and girls situation in Sudan. This is what I wanted to say. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for the recommendations. We are always communicating with the Commissioner Hatem, and he is ready always to listen and cooperate. We thank him. Rest assured that the report will reach him, and I will inform him of your recommendation, and it should be it could be the start of the campaign of advocacy for enforced disappearance.
And for spending time with us, in this session. The discussion was, very detailed, and it's about an issue that's extremely painful and complex, but we feel that we are, kind of putting our hand at the first steps towards, starting to engage on the issue of enforced disappearance and supporting other women organizations in Sudan to do the same. We will remain, committed to take this issue further, and we would really appreciate, your continuous support and your help, as we are moving forward on exposing the level of violations that women and girls are experiencing. Thank you very, very much, and have a good evening. Yeah. Bye-bye.
شكرا، مع السلامة. شكرا.
شكرا سعادة المفوضة، أسعدتونا
Thank you
كثير.
so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah. أسعدتونا كثير.